So today's topic is on quality, and you know what everybody's always told me all along, which I don't believe, by the way, is that quality you'll know it when you see it.
Ooh.
Not good. So I don't know. Why did you kick us off with what your thoughts about quality? Maybe a vignette or something that and
So once upon a time, I had been working for only a year in my entire career, and I was hired to help build an IT organization within a transportation company. And here I was minding my own business, and my supervisor said, "Tim, get these boxes out of the office and have them shipped over to Texas and do it quickly." And I said, okay, I don't know how to ship things, and I don't know the mechanism for packing the computers and making those foam things. And he said, don't worry, just do it. It's really easy. It's self-explanatory. And you see where this is going, right?
yeah,
And
self-explanatory. Yep.
yeah. So I got an email from his boss, and his boss was very mature. And his boss said, okay, Tim, here's the deal. Number one, tell me how you're going to make this right. Number two, tell me how you're going to demonstrate this is never going to happen again coming out of your organization. And so, yeah, he was very patient with me. And it taught me that, doing things the right way is not necessarily something people explain. It's like you said, you'll see it. It's funny because you and I have basically said the same thing, and come to the same conclusion.
Well, the idea of you'll know it when you see it, then it's too late because if you don't see it, that means there's no quality, in which case you've just reneged on your fiduciary and your duty basically to your customer. So by the way, how much damage was there in your first shipment?
One dented computer and one keyboard that had to be thrown. I was pretty lucky out of five shipped computers. It wasn't bad. They were just going in a huge truck, and it was just like a 7-hour trip. But yeah.
But if people don't necessarily pay attention to the contents, they kind of start throwing stuff around, and there goes your.
See it, yeah, and that's the problem, and we realize very quickly in our careers, I hope, that we are only a small part of a very huge system, and every person in that system contributes to doing things right.
So in my experience, and you and I have talked a lot about our different experiences, but in my experiences from the past, because I was in a situation where we bid on the work, and a lot of times in the requests for proposal, the requirement for quality was actually built into the contract language. And so therefore our stakeholders would already demand some sort of accounting for quality right from the bid process on going on forward. But have you ever been in a situation, for example, where you have been the one that's had to kind of let your stakeholders know what you would expect to build in as quality or to define quality for them?
Oh, certainly. And even in under contract, basically I was coming in as an advisor for computers, managing fleets of computers, and also coming in and helping people plan for and design data centers. And I and my experts had to be the one that said, this is what a good data center is. This is what a data center does, and this is what a good data center does. And we had to be the ones who define the quality for them.
Yeah, it's probably no different than in many other aspects of our daily lives. A little while ago, I took my car in for service, and my service manager, who happens to be a friend of mine, said, "By the way, you better take care of these two or three other things." He could have just said, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," "Whatever, sir," and just did what I asked him to do. But because he's a quality minded person, he let me know what else had to be serviced. And it wasn't because he's a friend. I know he wasn't in there looking for extra business, but he was looking out for me. So I was his stakeholder, but by pointing out areas that I needed to improve the quality of my vehicle through repairs, it's much like what we're talking about here, is that we owe it to our customers not only to do what they've asked us to do, but to make sure or ensure that quality is built in.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And again, if we take the high road, and if we say, this is a no shortcuts view, and we that's probably the best way to do it. It's just like everything else in a project. If we don't show the direction, if we don't hold ourselves and the project accountable, who else is going to?
Yeah. Well, and I've also talked about how we both think that this version 7 of the project management body of knowledge is probably new and improved. Actually, has its own built-in greater quality than past volumes. But what I was thinking in this situation, I went back and I looked up one of their definitions, and they talked about meeting acceptance criteria for deliverables, and I thought, PMI. Meeting is, to me, in my definition, that's bare minimum. Meeting, I like to exceed. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, yeah, it should be exceeding. If you're going to be working with clients, you're going to have to exceed expectations. Number one. Number two, quality is not just meeting acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria says, we finished the work, it functions.
Yeah.
But the problem is quality goes a little bit beyond that.
By the way, I've also been on the other side where people get so tied to or hung up on quality that they don't really care what else is going on. And I'll give you one example. I was on a project where the requirement was that every 3 months, I don't know why it was, put out this way, because we don't run projects based on quarterly basis, but every quarter we had to update the project schedule. We had to go through every line. We're talking 10, 15,000 line project schedule every quarter. And then the customer would go away and they would review it and let us know where they needed changes. Well, what would often happen is they would spend the entire quarter reviewing, give us our changes. In the meantime, it was up to us to, in the next quarter, to put out another version. And you're thinking they spent so much time looking at all of the little ticks and ties in the schedule that they lost sight of the fact that we had to use the schedule to advance the project.
You bring up something really important. It's appropriate that they set the expectations, for quality along with the scope. How do you coach your stakeholders and your team even to actually understand, what's necessary from a quality standpoint? How do we actually have that conversation that says we have to do things in a different way to give you what you need?
Well, I think from my perspective, there's a term that you and I have thrown around several times. It's called optimal. There is an optimal level of quality. When you exceed that level, sure, you get a slightly better product, but at what cost? There's an old saying in what we do in project management. We call it faster, better, cheaper. Pick two. So if you want it faster and better, it's not going to be cheaper. And part of that better is the quality. If you want it faster and cheaper, the quality is going to suffer. It won't be better. If you want it better and cheaper, it's going to take a while. So it's one of those things where you just have to bring people in line with what makes sense optimally.
Yeah, I look at it as a benefit cost formula. How much time and effort and money are we spending on, our quality activities, and what are we getting in return for them? And you're right, it sometimes isn't a math formula, but you can balance the two sides of these activities if you understand what quality is. Now, that gives us a whole different question. We've been talking about quality for about 10 minutes. What do you see as quality, and what activities on a project do you define as quality activities?
I'm not sure there is an activity that's not related in some form or fashion to quality. I mean, I just gave you an example of the schedule. Now, in that situation, you want even the schedule you want to be of quality because you want it to guide and direct your path to completion. But when the young man who was in charge of reviewing that quality, he thought his entire livelihood depended on perfection of that plan. And so instead of delivering changes to us or something to us in 10 days, he would take a full 3 months. And of course, that ruined our ability to continue that project from a schedule point of view and to satisfy him. So I think that the first part of that question is just in terms of being, applying, and we've said this many times, applying common sense to the whole process. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I like to go back to the technical definition and the formal terms of quality. You can find them in Total Quality Management, which came out in about, in the 70s and 80s. And then they contributed something called the International Standards for Quality, ISO 9000 and 9001. And they broke quality into 3 pieces. This is what's nice. They did a really good job of it too. They said there are 3 things that you need in every project. Number 1, you have to make sure that you're following process. If you have a repeatable process, you want to make sure that every time you do that process, you get the same result. That's called quality assurance.
Mm-hmm.
That's your audits. And then you have to inspect for defects. And the results of that inspection are going to feed back into your quality assurance. And then to speak to your meet or exceeds component, continuous improvement has to be part of that. Continuous improvement gives you the opportunity to have a better result than anybody expected at the end of the project.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Now, my bias, I've got a couple biases. One is the way I was raised by my dad. If it's not, it's the old thing about if the job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And it's the same thing in my business. The last 40 years, I did not get the next job unless I got a good reference from the previous one. And so from a bias perspective, I built particularly quality into everything that I delivered. But my bias from a customer point of view is the end product. It has to be easy to use. It has to make sense to them, and it has to be able to help them deliver their services to their customers, whether my customers are internal to the organization or external based on contracting with a firm. But you talked about, what was it, compliance or quality assurance. You talked about defect analysis. You talked about continuous improvement as the 3 major components. All of those, to me, funnel into making that user experience when I deliver the product to my end user to make it an excellent experience. And that, to me, shows the result of putting quality into everything we do.
And it's funny. We're focusing on actually managing the creation of the deliverable to create quality. And in the end, it should be invisible. The function of the deliverable, I really agree with you. Part of doing work correctly is that you don't have to do extra steps, and you don't have to do something that's out of line with the organization or something. If you're going to add a process or add a tool or something else, if you do, you're distracting from the work at hand, and that is incorrect work.
Well, and I tell you, there is nothing more rewarding in a contracting experience than not being low budget, low price, and still being accepted. And that acceptance comes because of your reputation and references as delivering quality, even if it costs a little more. Where do you, how do you develop, or where do you build your quality expectations, your quality requirements from? Where does that come from in your experience?
Well, traditionally, it's where we pull our requirements, period. You have government regulations, your enterprise factors, your EEFs. You have corporate policies and guidelines. They have regulations too. And then you have organization and business requirements and preferences. Like finance says you have to do it this way, and legal says you have to do it this way, and purchasing says you have to do it this way. So these are all quality expectations that we have. And then the deliverable itself and its nature. For instance, the company I worked for made silicon devices. And some of the devices they made had data lines, the little wires that were just a few molecules in width. And so you can imagine the quality expectation there. And then to actually add to that, some of these things went into heart monitors. And how many heart monitors can you allow to fail out of a run of 1 million? This is what you have to think about when you're a company.
Exactly. And I know it's sometimes those compliance issues, and especially government regulations or financial regulations, you look at them and say, well, that's really impeding my progress to be able to develop a good solution because this archaic regulation is getting in my way. But nonetheless, it's difficult to remove those if that's the law or if that's the internal policy.
I have an example. And I would say some of these archaic things are still just as valid and just as important as they always have been. Here's a great example. When you build a data center or you build a central office, which is a switching, it's a group of networks that handle the switching of telephone and data systems. They have to follow a standard called the Telecordia standard. Now, here's the thing. This thing has been around since the 40s and 50s when they started, really building data systems. And it's not just a bunch of standards, it's a bunch of regulations too. One of the regulations says when you have this type of a construction, you have to tie the data cables down every 18 inches. And you think, why do we have to follow these? And my co-owner would go with the telephone companies that we worked for and inspect some of our items. And a lot of the inspectors had the mindset, if I can identify something that you did wrong, that means there are 10 items there that I haven't seen yet. And so it's a reflection of all the work.
Well, that's certainly important. I also have an example, slightly different though than that experience. And that was we were working with a large state government to put together a procurement. So we had won the procurement to help them build the procurement, if you know what I mean. If you
Yes.
get. So what was happening is we ended up taking a bunch of their boilerplate, and then we built the rest of the requirements in for the particular system that was going to be bid out. But as I read through the boilerplate requirements, I went to the head of the government procurement and I said, I'm reading these things. If we don't change them, you're not going to get the bidders that you're expecting. Here are 4 or 5 things where, with my experience from some of the larger bidders, you're going to preclude them from bidding because of the risk tolerance of their organizations. And so they went back, and do you know how hard it is for procurement to change its own rules? But
Yes.
they did it. They did it based on providing some logic as to the quality that they could expect if they didn't get the kinds of bidders that they were looking for. And sure enough, we ended up getting 5 very strong bids from 5 very, very large, reputable companies. And the ones that would have normally bid, who didn't have that reputation or the capability, just did not bid. Now, you can say, well, you guys were precluding competition. No, we were not. We were bringing on the brightest and the best for this particular assignment, which quite frankly had to be handled by large, reputable corporations. So in that case, we were able to have them change their higher than required quality expectations and change them in such a way that they could elicit the kinds of bids and bidders that they wanted.
And that's what we have to do. It actually gets into the space of ethics. You know, it's not that this is a nice thing for your clients, but you know, when you're doing things correctly, it's funny. It's Joseph Duran, I think he said it's conformance to requirements and fitness for use, or usability. And usability includes things like, can I use it safely? Can I use it legally? Can I use it ethically?
Yeah.
And you're actually demonstrating that, you know, quality fits in with those categories. It's actually keeping in line with all of these things. You don't just have something that functions in an appropriate manner. It functions in a right manner, which is a little different.
Well, and that's why I brought up that example a little while ago in terms of it's almost in my DNA to see the results of what the quality is by looking at the user experience at the end once we produce the end result. And to me, that is the proof that comes with all of the quality expectations. But I know you and I have talked before, there's conformance requirements and non-conformance requirements. And some people will say, why do we have to do all of this extra work to build the quality in when we could just take some shortcuts here and there and deliver it faster and cheaper?
I talk to my students all the time about this. It's funny. If you look at the cost of quality, it's the cost of, you know, doing work correctly plus the work incorrectly. And it can be demonstrated that doing work correctly, like proper planning, proper estimation, adding inspections and tests, these all add to a project, right? And we call that conformance. Actually, that, and it can be both logically and mathematically demonstrated to be smaller than the cost of non-conformance, which has to do with lost business, with waste, and with rework. It's easy. Let's take rework for an example. Okay, if you do work correctly, yeah, you're going to have to plan it more appropriately. You're going to have to approach the work in a more careful fashion. It's going to take a little more time. But on the end side, if you don't do that, you're going to have something that you have to fix. Mm-hmm. And that's twice the amount of activity, right? Yep. Now, think about if you have to undo what you did and fix, that's 3 times the effort it takes. Yep. So it can be really easily demonstrated that cost of conformance is going to be less than non-conformance. And then if you invest in cost of conformance, your total cost of quality is going to be lower because you're going to pay for quality. Either you do when you either do it on the front of the project in planning and preparation, or you do it in recovering from your defect work.
Well, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right, not doing over. Right.
Right. Exactly. You said it much easier than I did.
So when we get into those situations, let's say we're not given a lot of direction or expectations of quality. Like you have a customer or a user base that says, we just got to get this done. Just get it in. But still, even in those situations, we as professionals still want to apply at least a minimal ability or minimal items to ensure that there is some quality that gets presented into the end project.
See, this is the difference between being recently introduced to project management and also doing projects for 10 years. The knee-jerk reaction is say, oh, you said quick. Okay, we'll do it quick. Yeah. And you're going to invest everything to sacrifice for a better schedule, right? And it's not going to balance out the way that your stakeholders want. So what you have to do is, number one, do the work appropriately and do the scheduling appropriately for that type of work and for the expectation of the individual.
So what are some of those ideas that we might implement on a project to ensure for ourselves even that we are presenting a quality product, or at least delivering on a quality basis?
Checklists, something as easy as a checklist, because number one, it gives people something to follow and they can repeat the process somewhat similarly. And number two, it can be used in audits to make sure and to demonstrate they're doing things correctly. That's the beautiful thing about checklists.
Yeah.
And then you have the training, right? That's another one that's very common. We want to make sure that everybody's doing this the same way. I often would do that when we were installing, multiple floors of a data center, so that we had not just the same look and feel, but the same response time and the same management of heat and all those type of things. And then we have proper and well-maintained tools and enough tools. I have had too many projects where I would have 7 workers and 6 shovels. And I don't know where the shovel fairy goes, but halfway through a project, or even the beginning of a project, these things that we call physical resources oftentimes just disappear and we don't know where. And it really hurts the product. And then also proper allocation of the schedule, proper planning, proper estimation. It's not questioning people. It's not padding or adding buffer. It's actually true estimation with an understanding of risk too. You can add buffer because you assume your team are poor estimators, but that's not going to help them on the next project or the next project. And so we want to say, okay, let's do a real estimation here and add risk so we can quantify that risk. So on future projects, we can use that same understanding of risk to get an even better estimate.
Well, and that's real important, because if we're not taking our lesson, well, first of all, if we're not doing a formal lessons learned, not just at the end of the project, but throughout the project as part of our quality initiative, we can't take the learnings to the next project. And so you had mentioned checklists. A lot of the checklists that I've worked with some of the companies I worked for, came as a result of something that came from a previous project.
Oh yeah. Interviews.
Similar,
yeah, go ahead.
No, similarly with templates. We go, oh, we can streamline this process if we build several templates. And that way, I think you'd mentioned, so that everyone's doing something the same way. The templates helped us ensure that we could collect the data we needed, and it was in a consistent format as well. So that all of that went towards developing a quality product. But it became, actually, I was going to mention this before, but it became so ingrained in what we did on a project by project basis that it became part of our methodology. It was a formal part of our methodology to build these quality aspects into the methodology itself.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
This is the nice thing. We're talking about tools that help us with our compliance and our audits and looking for defects. And all of a sudden, by creating this, we're taking advantage of quality improvement. And this is just like risk and risk management. You don't just look at quality of the deliverable. It behooves us also to shine that flashlight on our work. What's the quality of our project management and our project management processes?
Yeah, and part of the methodology we developed, and I think a lot of people listening to us today will understand this, is to also bring in some independent quality assurance or quality, just some quality review staff. So it's people who don't have blinders on because they're so immersed in the project. These are people who can come in with a fresh perspective as to what we're doing in our processes and and our procedures, but they can also take a look at it and say, well, we had something similar like this on another project, and this is what they did to fix that. So, you can always get this independence, whether it's scheduled, and we used to do them every quarter, or sometimes you get a little surprise visit, and some of those unscheduled ones are also very useful in terms of just really making us aware on a daily basis that quality becomes an important aspect of what it is that we do every day.
I am totally supportive of a combination of scheduled and random audits to confirm not only do we have something that we can demonstrate on a regular basis, but we can demonstrate we're using that all the time.
I'd also argue that built into the Agile process is this whole idea of even if it's self-quality assuring as a result of walking through some of the ceremonies that are built into the Agile process.
Yeah, done well and done in the manner for which it was designed, it will give us that consistent, and that's really important, because in Agile, you often don't know your destination. You know how you're going to work together to get there, you know your mission. So you have to have that commitment to, doing things correctly, looking for mistakes, looking for improvements, and consistently providing a result that actually heads you in the direction you want to go. We can do this in traditional projects in a plan, and so we have a reliable plan. But when you work in Agile, where you don't have a plan, you have to have the relationships, and you have to have some understanding of, we're going to commit to how these relationships function, and then we can get what we want.
As you were saying that, I was just thinking, my wife and I were, and I'll put quotes around this, planning a cross-country road trip.
Oh,
now, if I did this in a predictive fashion, I would do my night by night stops and my day by day sightseeing. But if I'm going to do it in an Agile process, maybe my objective is hit the East Coast at some point.
and
keep quality as part of that trip.
Yes, exactly. It actually does give you some opportunities for a result that is a better experience than what you could have had.
I was having this vision of sitting down on the side of the bed in our hotel room one evening and say, now, dear, we're going to have a retrospective.
Yeah, basically sitting over dinner and say, hey, what worked today and what didn't work? Okay,
yeah,
let's try this.
Yeah, and I can see where a quality experience could come out of that based on what you're experiencing on a day-to-day. Yeah, that's a great analogy of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and there are some other aspects of Agile that actually improve it on top of that. But yeah, this, from a quality perspective, having these ceremonies on a regular basis, and where the ceremonies are not for the purpose of documentation, although they're documented, but the focus of these ceremonies is to actually improve the work. This is where you have an opportunity to where you have an understanding of, this is generally what the work is today, and then tomorrow you get to reach there, and here's generally what we have. And it actually gives us a really good understanding of, how Agile really does work, to actually take this unknown state and create quality out of it.
Yeah. So, I think going back to my early statement about, we'll know quality when we see it. But all that we've been talking about so far are those things that help us bring about quality so that we're not surprised when we end up with a quality product. But are there other aspects of what we do to set up sort of those needs and expectations and bring quality to the project? Are there other things that we can do to ensure quality?
It's an attitude, and it's a mindset.
Yeah.
It's creating that environment. and it sounds, you know, very trite to say it, but servant leadership, creating that environment that shapes the expectation of the result through through responsibility and accountability, and growing the relationships, and working with the whole understanding that we're making a commitment here at the beginning of the project. And it's that commitment and it's that attitude that comes out of that commitment that actually changes the whole mindset of the group to, you know, invest a little bit extra into the project where it needs.
So that's kind of where I was going with that question, because if you really look at any textbooks or many textbooks that deal with quality, it's all kind of cut and dry checklists. It's this and that, but it doesn't get to the people aspects. I've rarely seen lessons or instructions on quality management that deal with the human aspects of what you just mentioned. And part of that is that relationship, building those relationships early. I think probably the way to sum this up is you can't wing quality. You can't, you have to be able to present it. And I think the other thing that I found is that by really committing to developing and delivering based on quality, is there's a discipline that is sort of introduced into that whole mindset that you just talked about. And it's that discipline that can also drive us to that great end result.
There are two aspects of project management that actually work to the benefit of the project manager. They actually demonstrate the value of project management itself. It's risk management and it's quality management. You
right.
can say at the end of a project, we got this. And if it wasn't for managing quality aggressively, we wouldn't have done this. Or you can say, if it wasn't for managing risk aggressively. I think these two aspects of project management are underserved in most projects. And in some ways, they don't just, you know, support the other areas of your project management work, like schedule, scope, and budget, and all the others. They actually provide something that people don't even understand they value until they experience it. And that's where we get to an understanding that, you know, a lot of people do say they'll know quality when they see it. They'll know quality when they experience it.
Right.
That's for sure.
Well, and going back to my comment about it takes discipline. When I was a young man, I worked a lot to put myself through school, or at least have the spending money for school. I worked on construction sites, and my foreman was extremely judicious about making sure the site was always clean. Now, could we have built that structure as quickly? Probably more quickly had we not always stopped to clear up boards or clear up that. But you know what? It takes one person stepping on a nail that takes them out of service for a week, and you just lost that time. So when you sit there and you go, why is he being so adamant that we keep a clean work site as part of this? This isn't just sort of something being tidy, but this was part of his quality aspect of a job well done. And that was to also prevent injury. So there's all sorts of aspects of quality that we can get to that are almost invisible. And you mentioned something about risk management and quality management. They're sort of taken, they're not really paid attention to as much as they should be. Could it be that they were introduced into our methodologies at a later stage than other aspects of what it is that we do to deliver projects?
I'm going to have to look at that history. I have my archives. And I'll look at that history, and I bet you and I will find something interesting there. Now, let me actually post something to you, okay? So I have two examples of what you were talking about. Number one is the military. I have a lot of friends who went into the military, and on day one, they're taught one thing: how to make a bed. How to make a bed, you think when you go to boot camp, you think it's not going to keep me alive. It's not going to make me a better soldier. But it's not that you're going to make a bed when you're out on the field. It's that it's setting and establishing that mindset and that attitude for the rest of your work. And it's funny. I've been studying discipline the last 6 months, and critical thinking and analysis and self-learning and all these things. And it's funny, the way you set the beginning of your day is basically, established with the first few actions you create.
That's interesting, because I have a friend who was a Green Beret. He's retired from the military, and he's an entrepreneur, fantastic individual. I don't mind mentioning his name here. His name is Larry Broughton. And I remember him talking to me one time, and that's what he said. Every morning when you make up, first thing, make your bed.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have another story for you.
Yeah.
So when we were upgrading cell towers between 2012 and 2013, we had to actually install these backup power supplies, and it was really cool work. We'd often have 5 or 7 or 9 runs of 50 to 90 meter cable. And this was like, pretty thick cable. And it was very costly, and you couldn't waste anything. We actually were very adamant about picking up the waste, even the waste of other companies. And what we would do at the end of the day was collect the whole work site underneath, any scrap of copper wire we'd found. And then one of the owners or one of the leads would take that for reclamation. And the next week's lunch would always be a nice sit down. This actually demonstrated to me, number one, what's the proper attitude of an owner of a business? And number two, what's the proper approach to managing waste?
Well, and again, that goes right down to just like my example of the foreman who kept the construction site tidy. There's nothing more disturbing than being out in nature and finding trash all over the place. So what you did, besides giving you pride of ownership and pride of your work, you kept the site clean and tidy. You made yourself enough money to make a little lunch, but at the same time, it went into the quality of your discipline, or your discipline that led to the quality that probably reflected itself in other aspects of your work.
See, that's the thing. Restaurant industry has this too. They call it mise en place, right? Everything in its place. You take something out of a drawer, you use it, you clean it, you immediately put it back. So whoever knows where it is, they can grab it. It's a properly run work environment. In manufacturing production, they do the same thing. Everything has its place, and it's used, it's cleaned, it's inspected, and then it's put back exactly where it needs to be, right? It has to be that way, because you don't just do things right once. You need to do things right consistently. Secondly, it sets that attitude and mindset. So I cannot stress this enough. And if I was to actually make sure that the team and the stakeholders had their eyes on quality, I would create, like your supervisor said, that properly maintained environment.
And it does for those people who are coming across our job sites or coming across the work we're doing, and they see that we're taking care of those incidentals that aren't part of our contract, but are adding to the sort of the great look and feel of what it is that we're doing. They take a look at that and they say, that is a quality firm. Years ago, a woman that we knew, she'd never been married. She'd been on her own forever, doing whatever she needed to do. She took her car in once to a maintenance, to a garage, to a service center. And for some reason, something about this service center didn't give her a good look and feel. And so before she went in, she had applied Scotch tape to a couple places where she knew that she needed to have service done. And when she got the bill afterwards, which was substantial, she said, "Could I take a look at a couple of these?" And the guy scoffed at her, said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And she went and pulled off some Scotch tape and said, "You're using the same brand of Scotch tape that I am." Now,
That's a good
please,
approach to it.
yeah, now please service my car for what you charge me, and I will never come back here again, because clearly you are not a quality shop. So, there's something even about the human behavior aspects of what we do in life that reflects upon everything else we do in life.
I do embrace this concept of having a right attitude. It's the character and the behavior. I maintain that as an attitude. This is why we don't just teach skills and knowledge when we train our workers. We also teach these character and behavior things too. It has to be a necessary part of the work we do, or it won't be a primary focus.
You and I do that. I wish that a lot more people, a lot more organizations would do that, because they do. They like to tick the boxes saying we've done our training, but they never really got behind the why. Why am I teaching you this technical aspect of your work product without having you understand why it is you're doing that, the quality aspects that you need to put into it, and the customer satisfaction that results in that, from that?
I want to give you a little bit of a different perspective. In the most recent years, especially coming out of the pandemic and through economic instability, I've noticed that when I do talk about these things, about quality and risk, and I talk about, it's an attitude and a mindset, not just a set of activities and checklists. People are resonating with it.
Yeah.
I mean, really, people are saying, "Tim, I don't get this from the other trainers I talk to. You're saying something really different, and you're saying something that's important." And I know I'm hitting the right buttons to these people. It's not just something that can give your company, more productivity or more profit. It actually is a brand differentiator for yourself as you're a project manager, and then as you eventually go out and hang up your own shingle.
So if we were advising, and we do have a number of young, up and coming project managers in our audience, to advise them, I think what you just said is very important.
Let's go and do a quick punch list of that. What would you add? What would you tell them to do?
I would tell them to make their bed every morning, Tim.
Yeah. Basically demonstrate correct work from day one. Here's how we're going to build a team charter correctly, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the biggest thing, though, is, experience is invaluable. And of course, you don't have that experience when you're first starting out. And so even as, in the organizations I was part of, you went from a practitioner to a team leader to an assistant to a project manager. So you kind of had those steps. But at every step of the way, we tried to include experiences or decision-making processes whereby a person would learn as to what goes into, for example, a quality product. And oftentimes we would end up with, and this is some advice I want to give to our younger listeners, is that sometimes their ideas were better than our own because they were closer to the product at hand.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We don't hold the market on knowledge.
That's right. And so therefore they should have confidence in developing their ideas. And if they're not sure, bounce it off someone else and see the reaction they get.
This is something I do want to leave my our listeners with. There's a fundamental expectation that project managers are the buck stops here. I don't have to rely on everything. I don't have to rely on anything. I can do this. I have to make the decision. It's me. I have to be doing things perfectly or the project fails. And that is so wrong.
Yeah.
First of all, your peers and your mentors, every good project manager I've seen has months, if not years, of relationships with people smarter than them, more mature than them, and they fall back on them. And then also utilization of their experts and their teams to where the project manager is comfortable stepping out of the decision making.
Oh, absolutely. Or at least assisting in the decision making, but not insisting that it's their decision.
Right. It's that facilitation
Yeah.
that we're talking about here.
But I think there's a couple of things, and with experience comes wisdom. With years comes experience, and so younger project managers shouldn't kind of give up on the idea. But think of what we talked about with optimal quality. At some point, you develop that sense of, wait a minute, this is going way too far, and it's not necessary. And so then you can have those discussions to perhaps dial it back a little bit. But there's all of these aspects, and dare I say it, common sense has to prevail in a lot of these aspects.
Yeah. Again, at the end of the day, you are limited by schedule, scope, cost, and resources, and you have to fit within those expectations. And with that, you still have to deliver something that functions and has value. And quality is one of those dials we can have that actually can add to the expectation.
Hopefully we have been able to deliver quality as part of this podcast. Even if the words all sometimes failed me, I think the presentation and the ideas did not. So, and again, I remind people these are things that have worked for us. Try them or try something along the lines, and they may or may not work for you. But quality is something that it will always, always, always take you to the next level.
Very good. Looking
Mhm.
forward to another conversation next week. I can't wait to see what we're going to talk about.
I bet you've got an idea. And so until next week, signing off.
Thanks again.